So privileged to introduce some pretty cool people today. Chairman Neil Chatterjee from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is our next speaker. He has been at National Clean Energy Week Symposium speaking before, so we're always pleased that he recognizes the value of coming to speak to this audience. Chairman Chatterjee was nominated to lead FERC by the President in May 2017, confirmed by the Senate August 2017, served as chairman, came back. Anyway, he's chairman again as of October 2018. We're so fortunate to have his leadership. Before he was at FERC, he was the energy policy advisor for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, playing a major role in energy, highway, agricultural legislation, you name it, Neil's done it. So thank you so much. Neil, why don't you come up? Thank you so much for being with us today. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be here with you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be back and be part of the discussion of ideas and what happens here at National Clean Energy Week, and it's a privilege to be part of the Policymakers Symposium. Before I get into the substance of my remarks, I have to give the lawyerly disclaimers. The views I express here are my own opinions and don't necessarily reflect those of my fellow commissioners or FERC staff, and our ex parte rules prevent me from discussing any contested proceedings currently before the Commission. With those formalities out of the way, I'd like to turn to the issues that I'd like to speak about today. As many of you know, I have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC. The Commission regulates the nation's wholesale electricity markets, natural gas infrastructure, pipeline transportation rates, and the security of the electricity grid. Energy enables every aspect of our daily lives. It lights our homes, fuels our transportation needs, allows us to communicate with each other, and even powers life-saving medical devices. Energy also contributes significantly to our workforce. More than 6.7 million Americans work in the industry, with those numbers continuing to rise. Our nation's energy landscape is changing before our very eyes. U.S. electricity prices are low, emissions are declining, and new technologies are continuously modernizing our energy infrastructure. These changes present opportunities for consumers to become more active market participants and to have greater control over their energy usage. There are many drivers behind this significant and historic change, but I'll focus on three in particular today. Let me start with the increasing deployment of clean energy resources. Market forces continue to drive the deployment of cleaner energy sources. Rapid decreases in capital costs for clean energy resources are a major factor in this trend. Clean energy resources can now more readily compete with more traditional generation on cost alone. Also, across our nation, there's a rising market demand for carbon-free generation, and we're only seeing that grow. City and municipal governments are demanding increased renewables. For example, the City of San Diego set a goal of being 100% renewable by 2035, and as part of their commitment to corporate sustainability, 2/3 of Fortune 100 companies are procuring renewable energy. This rise of renewable resources that we are seeing has helped make the U.S. a leader in emissions reductions. I know many of you have heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. I am a Republican from Kentucky, the heart of coal country, but I'm cognizant of the very real impacts of climate change and believe it's incumbent upon all of us to confront it. This is in part why I have focused my efforts at the Commission to addressing barriers to competition for energy storage and distributed energy resources in energy markets. These advanced energy technologies can help enable the deployment of renewables, which can further contribute to efforts to lower emissions. What we are doing is working to level the playing field for storage technologies on the electric side. I believe our efforts in this area will fundamentally alter the way that we generate, distribute, and consume energy. As we integrate more renewable resources into our grid, energy storage will be a necessary component. We all know wind and solar generation resources are intermittent. When the wind isn't blowing or when the sun isn't shining, they aren't producing electricity. But when storage technologies, like batteries, are co-located with wind and solar, that's truly a game changer. Last year, the Commission took a significant step forward to unleash the power of storage technology. We issued Order 841, a rulemaking that required regional market operators to facilitate the participation of energy storage resources in their markets. Order 841 stemmed from concerns that storage technologies were often not given adequate opportunities to compete in all organized markets. Given the evolving technologies involved in energy storage, market rules are often outdated and struggle to keep up with the pace of innovation. As evident in any market system, artificial barriers to entry not only hamper the continued development of storage, but more importantly, result in higher costs for consumers. This year, we affirmed Order 841, and though we face some opposition, I firmly believe we got it right. We took the right steps to unleash the potential of storage technologies, but we still have more work ahead of us. Right now, we are closely reviewing the various markets' proposals for how they will meet the requirements of this new rule, and then the hard work of implementation will begin. In this same vein, the Commission is examining barriers to the participation of distributed energy resources, or DERs, in energy markets. Normally, I would give a disclaimer about this being a wonky policy issue, but I have a feeling this might just be the perfect crowd to discuss DER aggregation. Advanced energy technologies allow consumers the opportunity for greater control, convenience, and choice when it comes to their electricity use. Most of these technologies are located at the distribution level of the electric grid. Behind-the-meter energy storage lets consumers store electricity for later use, while intelligent energy technologies enable consumers to monitor and manage their energy consumption. Microgrids are small, localized groupings of electricity generation, energy storage, and electrical loads. When a microgrid senses an outage, it disconnects from the central grid and uses its own generation and storage capabilities to serve the consumers within the microgrid. Allowing new technologies like these to aggregate and participate in wholesale electricity markets could accelerate investments into microgrids and behind-the-meter generation. As you can imagine, this policy area raises complex jurisdictional and operational issues, so we're examining the issues closely. But there's no doubt that efforts to break down barriers to distributed energy resources could open up significant opportunities for businesses and consumers across the nation. Before I close, I'd like to talk about what we are doing at FERC to spur investment and get the right transmission infrastructure in place. In addition to the great strides made in addressing energy storage, another major focus during my time with the Commission has been transmission policies. The U.S. electric transmission network is often referred to as the largest interconnected machine in the world. It includes more than 240,000 circuit miles of transmission lines. This high-voltage network forms the backbone of the electric grid by transporting power from electric generators to local distribution systems, which ultimately deliver electricity to consumers. Transmission is one of those special issues in our government that tends to garner broad support from leaders across the political spectrum. Right now, we have the opportunity to create the type of regulatory environment that's necessary to spur smart investments in tomorrow's grid. What do I mean by that? Well, we need a grid that provides a high degree of reliability, but that's also flexible enough to accommodate the fast pace of change we've all been discussing. And that will take investment, a lot of it. For example, a transmission nonprofit issued a report earlier this year projecting that the U.S. will require $30 to $90 billion in incremental transmission investments by 2030 to accommodate the pace of change. Now, that's just one study, of course, but it speaks to the fact that getting the necessary transmission projects financed and built will be no small task. So what are some things that FERC can do in the near to medium term? Earlier this year, the Commission opened up a proceeding to examine our transmission incentives policy. Back in 2005, FERC received new statutory authority to use transmission incentives to help ensure reliability and reduce congestion on our grid. And the Commission's current incentives policy compensates transmission developers for the risks and challenges faced by specific transmission projects, such as the difficulty of obtaining state permits, the challenges facing construction, and the use of novel technologies. But in the past 13 years, under this policy, we've done a lot of learning about what makes sense and what doesn't. My colleagues and I have come to realize that rather than focusing on compensating developers for risks, we should consider shifting our focus to fostering transmission projects that provide the greatest benefit to consumers. So we've asked industry and stakeholders for input on how to realign our incentives paradigm. We're also examining the Commission's return on equity, or ROE, policies. I believe we have to ensure that transmission projects can compete for capital, so I'm excited about our work to update FERC's ROE policies. I recognize that incentives and returns for investors are just a piece of the puzzle when it comes to modernizing our transmission infrastructure, but I'm really looking forward to scoping out some smart, high-impact changes we can make to encourage the right transmission investments. On that note, I want to thank you all again for the opportunity to be here with you and to share my views. I look forward to continuing this important dialogue as our energy landscape continues to evolve. Thank you.